10 Teachings of Lao Tzu, Stories of the Tao 1. Wu Wei, Action Without Force. In a village by a bamboo grove lived an old carpenter named Shun, the most renowned craftsman in the region. One day, a young apprentice came to him and asked, "Master, how do you create such beautiful works? What must I do to become like you?" Shun smiled and said nothing. Instead, he led the boy to his workshop. There, a massive piece of camphor wood waited to be transformed. The apprentice watched as the old master simply stood before the wood. His eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. Minutes passed. Then, without apparent effort, Shin picked up his tools and began to work. His hands moved like water flowing over stones. Smooth, natural, unhurried. He didn't force the chisel through the wood. Rather, he seemed to follow invisible paths already present in the grain. Within hours, a magnificent dragon emerged. Its scales so delicate they seemed to shimmer. Its eyes so alive they appeared to watch you. "Master," the apprentice gasped. "How did you do this?" "I did nothing," Shin replied. "I simply removed what was not the dragon. The dragon was already sleeping in the wood. I did not force it into being. I allowed it to emerge. This is Wu Wei, action without force, doing by not doing." The apprentice frowned, confused. "But master, I saw you work. You carved, you chiseled, you sanded." "Yes," Shin nodded. "But did you see me struggle? Did you see me fight the wood? When you force something, you create resistance. The wood splits, the blade dulls, the spirit exhausts itself. But when you flow with the nature of things, even the hardest work becomes effortless." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "The river does not push the water forward. The water flows because that is its nature. The sun does not strain to shine. Light radiates because that is what the sun is. Learn to work with the grain of life, not against it. Then even the impossible becomes simple." Years later, that apprentice became a master himself. People would marvel at his works and ask his secret. He would smile, remembering Shin, and say, "I simply allow things to become what they already are." 2. The power of softness. In the high mountains, where eagles built their nests among jagged peaks, lived a martial arts master named Lin. His fists could break stones, his kicks could shatter wood, and his reputation for strength spread across 3 provinces. Warriors came from distant lands to challenge him, and each left defeated. One winter morning, an old woman appeared at his door. Her back was bent with age, her hands gnarled like ancient tree roots. "I have come to teach you," she said simply. Lin laughed, not unkindly. "Honored grandmother, I am the teacher here. What could you possibly teach me?" "The lesson you have not yet learned," she replied. Intrigued, Lin invited her in. She asked him to strike a wooden post in his courtyard, something he did 100 times each day in training. His fist struck like thunder, and the post shuddered but remained standing. "Now," said the old woman, "watch." She walked to the post and simply placed her palm against it, soft as a whisper. Then she began to push, not with force, but with a gentle, persistent pressure, like water against stone. First, nothing happened. Lin grew impatient, but the old woman continued, her breath calm, her touch unwavering. Minutes passed. Then, imperceptibly at first, the post began to lean. The earth around its base began to give way. And then, without violence, without force, the massive post fell. "How?" Lin stammered. The old woman sat down, catching her breath. "Water is the softest substance on earth, yet it carves canyons through mountains. Snow falls softly, yet its weight can collapse roofs. The wind cannot be grasped, yet it topples trees. Hardness may win battles, but softness wins wars." She looked at his calloused, scarred hands. "Your strength is formidable, but it is also rigid. And what is rigid can be broken. True strength lies in flexibility, in yielding, in softness that persists." Over the following weeks, the old woman taught Lin a different way. She showed him how to redirect force rather than meet it head-on, how to bend without breaking, how to absorb attacks like water absorbs stones. She taught him that the softest answer turns away wrath, that gentleness can overcome violence, that patience outlasts aggression. The day she left, Lin bowed deeply. "Grandmother, what is your name?" "Names don't matter," she smiled. "But remember this. The hard and rigid are disciples of death. The soft and flexible are disciples of life. Water always defeats rock, not because it is stronger, but because it never stops being itself." Lin never forgot. In the years that followed, his style changed. Those who came to challenge him found not the stone fist they expected, but something far more difficult to defeat. A master who moved like wind and water, who yielded yet never surrendered, who was soft yet unconquerable. 3. The value of emptiness. In the great city of Chang'an, there lived a wealthy merchant named Zhou who prided himself on his vast collection of treasures. His house overflowed with jade statues, silk scrolls, golden vessels, and precious stones. Every room was packed, every shelf was full, every corner was occupied. Visitors praised his wealth, and Zhou basked in their admiration. One day, a simple potter named Mei arrived at his door, carrying a single ceramic bowl. "I have brought you a gift," she said. Zhou examined the bowl with a critical eye. It was plain, undecorated, and appeared entirely ordinary. "This?" he said, unable to hide his disappointment. "I have hundreds of bowls, many made of gold and silver. What makes this one special?" Mei smiled gently. "Look again. But this time, look at what isn't there." Zhou frowned. "What isn't there?" "There's nothing remarkable about this bowl at all." "Precisely," Mei said. "Now tell me, what makes a bowl useful?" "Its material, its craftsmanship, its beauty," Zhou answered quickly. "No," Mei shook her head. "Those things make a bowl expensive but not useful. What makes a bowl useful is the emptiness within it. The clay forms the vessel, but it is the empty space that holds water, rice, or soup. Without that emptiness, a bowl is just a lump of clay." She gestured around his crowded home. "Your house is like a bowl filled with bowls. Where is the space to live? Where is the room to breathe?" Zhou felt a strange discomfort. He looked around his treasures with new eyes and suddenly saw not wealth but clutter, not abundance but suffocation. Mei continued, "A room is useful because of its empty space, not its walls. A door is useful because you can pass through it, not because of the wood. A window serves because it is open, not because it is closed. We shape clay, wood, and stone, but their usefulness comes from what is not there." She placed the simple bowl in his hands. "The same is true of life. If your days are too full, where is room for wonder? If your mind is too crowded with thoughts, where is space for wisdom? If your heart is too packed with possessions, where is room for joy?" That night, Zhou could not sleep. He walked through his house, seeing it as if for the first time. Every object demanded his attention, required his care, claimed his energy. He realized he owned nothing, his possessions owned him. The next morning, he began to give things away. Not all at once, but gradually, thoughtfully. He kept what he truly loved and released what merely occupied space. As his house emptied, something remarkable happened. It became more beautiful. Light poured through unblocked windows. Air circulated freely. The remaining treasures, no longer competing for attention, could finally be appreciated. But the most profound change was within Zhou himself. As his external world simplified, his internal world expanded. He discovered he had time to think, space to feel, room to wonder. The constant anxiety of protecting his possessions faded. The exhaustion of maintaining so much dissolved. Years later, visitors would come to Zhou's house and marvel at its serenity. "You must be very poor now," some would say, seeing the sparse rooms. Zhou would smile and serve them tea in Mei's simple bowl. "No," he would reply. "I was poor when I had everything. Now I am rich because I have room for anything." 4. Return to the source. High in the mountain province of Yunnan, a young scholar named Jian received the highest honor in the empire, an appointment to the royal court. His family celebrated, his village rejoiced, and Jian himself swelled with pride. He packed his finest robes, his most precious books, and prepared for his journey to the capital. On the day of his departure, he visited his old teacher, Master Feng, who lived in a simple hut near a mountain stream. Jian expected congratulations, perhaps even envy. Instead, Master Feng simply said, "Before you go, walk with me to the stream." They walked in silence to where the water emerged from the mountainside. A small spring, barely more than a trickle. "This is the source," Feng said. "Do you hear its sound?" Jian listened. The sound was gentle, pure, almost musical. "Yes, master. Now come." They followed the stream as it grew, joined by other tributaries, widening and deepening. Eventually, they reached a place where the stream had become a river, loud, turbulent, churning with mud and debris. "This is the same water," Feng said over the roar. "But listen to it now." The sound was completely different. Harsh, chaotic, powerful but not peaceful. Feng led Jian back to the source. The stream begins clear and pure, making a sound like music. As it descends, it accumulates mud, rocks, and branches. It becomes powerful, yes, but also dirty and noisy. And yet, if you trace any river back far enough, you always find the same thing, a pure spring emerging from the earth. He looked at his student with kind eyes. "You are leaving for the capital, where you will accumulate honors, wealth, and power. You will grow loud and turbulent, like the river. But Jian, never forget your source. You were born pure and simple like this spring. That essential nature is still within you and always will be." Jian nodded, but he was young and didn't truly understand. He went to the capital and, as predicted, accumulated everything his teacher had mentioned. He became a high official, wore silk robes, and commanded servants. His name was spoken in palaces, his opinions shaped policies. But something was wrong. The more he gained, the less satisfied he felt. The more important he became, the more anxious he grew. Sleep eluded him. Peace abandoned him. He was successful, powerful, wealthy, and miserable. 20 years later, exhausted and disillusioned, Jian resigned his position. He returned to his mountain village, uncertain of what he was seeking. Old Master Feng, now ancient, still sat by his hut near the stream. Without a word, Jian knelt by the spring and cupped his hands to drink. The water was exactly as he remembered, cold, pure, sweet. Tears streamed down his face. "Welcome home," Feng said softly. "You have returned to your source." "Master," Jian wept. "I wasted 20 years. "No," Feng shook his head. "You needed to become the loud river to understand why the quiet spring is precious. You needed to become muddy to remember what clarity feels like. The Tao teaches us that all things return to their source. A tree's leaves fall and nourish its roots. Rain rises from the ocean and returns to the ocean. We spend our lives becoming complex, accumulating layers, moving away from simplicity. But wisdom is remembering what we were before we became what we are." Jian stayed in the village. He never returned to the capital. People who knew his history sometimes pitied him, thinking he had failed. But those who saw his face knew differently. He had the expression of someone who had been lost and found himself, who had been thirsty and finally drunk deep. He built a small school by the stream and taught children, always beginning each lesson the same way. "Before we learn anything new, let us remember what we already know. Before we become something great, let us appreciate what we are." 5. The wisdom of not knowing. In the monastery of White Cloud Mountain, there was a monk renowned throughout the land for his knowledge. His name was Chun, and scholars traveled for months to debate with him. He had memorized thousands of texts, could recite the classics flawlessly, and had an answer for every question. His mind was like a vast library, categorized and complete. One autumn, an old wandering monk named Wu appeared at the monastery gates. He carried nothing but a walking stick and wore robes so patched they were more patches than robe. The abbot, knowing Chen's love of intellectual challenge, arranged for them to have tea together. Chun was eager to demonstrate his knowledge. "Honored guest," he began, pouring tea into Wu's cup. "I have studied the Tao Te Ching for 30 years. I can explain any passage, resolve any paradox, illuminate any mystery. He continued pouring, but he was so focused on his words that he didn't notice Wu's cup was full. The tea spilled over the rim, across the table, and onto the floor. "Stop," Wu said. "The cup is full. No more will go in." Chen stopped, embarrassed. But Wu smiled kindly. "You are like this cup. Your mind is so full of knowledge that nothing new can enter. How can I teach you anything when you already think you know everything?" Chen felt his pride wounded. "Are you saying my knowledge is worthless?" "Not at all," Wu replied. "But knowing and wisdom are different things. You know many facts, but do you know when you don't know? That is the beginning of wisdom." Over the following days, Wu posed questions that Chen couldn't answer. "What is the sound of your true nature? Where were you before you were born? Can you show me your original face?" Chen found these questions frustrating. "These questions have no answers. They're meaningless." "Ah," Wu said. "Now you're learning. The questions that matter most often have no answers we can speak. The deepest truths cannot be captured in words. The greatest knowledge is knowing the limits of knowledge." He told Chen a story. Once, a great scholar fell into a river. As he drowned, a fisherman dove in to save him. When they reached the shore, the scholar lectured the fisherman about the 17 classical swimming techniques. The fisherman, who had never heard of these techniques, had nonetheless saved his life. "Tell me, who knew more about swimming?" Chen was silent. Wu continued, "The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. The wise person holds knowledge lightly, like water in cupped hands, knowing it will flow away. The fool grasps knowledge tightly, like a fist around sand, and wonders why it slips through his fingers." That night, Chen couldn't sleep. His entire identity had been built on knowing, on being the expert, on having answers. What would he be without his knowledge? In the morning, he found Wu preparing to leave. "Master Wu, please stay. Teach me how to not know." Wu laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "You cannot learn not knowing from me. But I will tell you this. Every day, forget something you think you know. Every day, say, 'I don't know,' at least once. Every day, meet the world as if for the first time. The mind of a beginner contains many possibilities. The mind of an expert contains few." He placed his hand on Chen's shoulder. "True wisdom is not filling the cup but keeping it empty, ready to receive. Not accumulating answers but holding questions gently. Not knowing everything but being comfortable with mystery." After Wu left, Chen's teaching changed completely. When students asked him questions, he often replied, "I don't know. Let's explore this together." At first, students were disappointed. They had come for answers, not questions. But gradually, something remarkable happened. The classroom became alive with genuine inquiry. Students stopped trying to memorize Chen's answers and started thinking for themselves. They discovered that not knowing wasn't ignorance, it was openness. It was freedom. It was the space where real learning happened. Years later, when Chen became abbot, visitors expecting to meet a great scholar were surprised to find a man who seemed to know very little. But those who stayed longer discovered something more valuable than knowledge. They discovered wisdom, which is knowing that the mystery is the point, that questions are often more important than answers, and that the wisest words ever spoken are sometimes simply, "I don't know." 6. The paradox of leadership. In the province of Sichuan, there were 2 neighboring villages, each with a different kind of leader. The first village was governed by Mayor Huang, a man of great presence and power. When he spoke, his voice thundered. When he decreed, people obeyed immediately. He made all decisions himself, believing that strong leadership required a firm hand and clear control. The second village was led by Mayor Lin, a quiet woman whom visitors often mistook for an ordinary villager. She dressed simply, spoke softly, and seemed to do very little. Decisions in her village appeared to emerge from the community itself, though Lin was always somehow present in the process. One year, a terrible drought struck both villages. The rivers dried up, crops withered, and people began to worry about survival. Mayor Huang immediately took charge. He created detailed plans for water rationing, assigned work crews, and posted guards to enforce his regulations. He worked day and night, managing every detail, making every decision. The villagers did as they were told, but resentment grew. Those with wells were forced to share equally with those who had none. Farmers were ordered to abandon certain fields to save others. Guards had to use force to prevent people from taking extra water. The village became efficient but joyless, organized but divided. People obeyed Mayor Huang, but they also blamed him for their hardship. "It is his fault," they whispered. "His rationing plan favors the north side of the village. His work crews are not fair. His rules are too harsh." In Mayor Lin's village, things unfolded differently. When the drought began, she simply called the village together and asked, "What should we do?" At first, there was chaos. Everyone spoke at once, offering contradictory ideas. But Lin listened patiently, occasionally asking gentle questions. "How would that work? What about those who cannot dig? Has anyone tried this before?" Gradually, the villagers began to organize themselves. Those with wells volunteered to share. Families agreed to help each other dig new wells. The young and strong assisted the elderly and weak. Creative solutions emerged that no single person would have conceived. Someone discovered an underground spring, another designed a dew collection system, a third organized efficient water transport. Lin's role seemed minimal. She did not command, she connected. She did not decide, she facilitated. She did not impose, she suggested. Yet somehow her presence was felt in every decision. People came to her with problems, and she would ask questions until they discovered their own solutions. The drought was just as severe in her village, but the atmosphere was entirely different. People felt ownership of their solutions. They worked hard but willingly. They made sacrifices but gladly. And when the rains finally came, the villagers celebrated together and said, "Look what we accomplished." A traveling philosopher visited both villages after the drought and asked the people about their leaders. In Mayor Huang's village, people had mixed feelings. "He worked very hard," they admitted. "He made many decisions," but their tone suggested burden, not gratitude. In Mayor Lin's village, people seemed almost unaware of having been led. "Oh, Mayor Lin," they said. "She's wonderful, but honestly, we solved most problems ourselves." The philosopher smiled, for he recognized the teaching of Lao Tzu. The best leader is one whose existence is barely known. When the best leader's work is done, the people say, "We did it ourselves." He sought out Mayor Lin and asked, "How do you lead without leading?" She smiled. "A leader who stands above the people is eventually beneath them. A leader who puts themselves ahead of the people is eventually behind them. I learned long ago that people do not need someone to solve their problems. They need someone who believes they can solve their own problems." "But don't they need your wisdom?" the philosopher pressed. "Perhaps," Lin replied, "but they need their own wisdom more. My role is not to be the wisest person in the village, but to create conditions where everyone's wisdom can emerge. The river does not push the fish forward, yet the fish travel far. The mother bird does not fly for her children, yet they learn to soar. The best governance is like the best parenting. It prepares people to not need you." The philosopher stayed in her village for a month and observed closely. He noticed that Lin worked just as hard as Mayor Huang, but her work was invisible. Building relationships, facilitating conversations, creating trust, removing obstacles. She led from behind, pushed from below, and guided from within. Before leaving, he asked her one final question. "Does it bother you that people don't recognize your leadership?" Lin laughed, a sound like water over stones. "If people recognized my leadership, I would know I had failed. The whole point is for them to discover their own power, not to rely on mine." Lao Tzu teaches that when the work is done and the task is accomplished, the people should feel, "We did this ourselves." This is the paradox of leadership. The more effectively you lead, the less people notice you leading. And that is not a failure, it is the highest success. 7. The teaching of non-striving. In the imperial gardens, there lived a gardener named Pan who had served the emperor for 40 years. His gardens were legendary. Flowers bloomed in impossible profusion. Fruits grew large and sweet, and even the stones seemed arranged by a divine hand. One spring, a young apprentice named Ming arrived from the agricultural academy. He had studied the latest techniques, memorized botanical classifications, and knew the precise measurements for water, soil, and nutrients. He was eager to improve the already magnificent gardens with his modern knowledge. Ming watched Pan work with growing frustration. The old gardener seemed to do nothing right. He didn't follow schedules for watering. He didn't measure fertilizer. He didn't prune according to the standard techniques. Instead, Pan would simply walk through the garden, sometimes sitting for hours beside a plant, occasionally touching a leaf or moving a stone a few inches. "Master Pan," Ming finally said, "I don't understand. You seem to do so little, yet the gardens thrive. In the academy, we learned that successful gardening requires constant effort and precise technique. But you appear to just be here." Pan smiled and gestured for Ming to sit beside a struggling peony. "Do you see this plant?" "Yes, master. It needs more nitrogen in the soil and should be watered twice daily until it recovers." "Perhaps," Pan said, "or perhaps it needs something else entirely. Watch with me." They sat in silence for what felt like hours to the impatient Ming. But gradually he began to notice things. The way the afternoon sun hit this spot was different from the morning sun. The soil here was slightly more compact. A nearby tree's roots had grown closer to the surface, competing for water. "Now you see," Pan said softly. "This plant doesn't need my techniques. It needs me to understand what it needs. And I cannot understand if I am too busy doing." Over the following weeks, Pan taught Ming a different way of gardening. "In the academy, they taught you to impose your will on nature," Pan explained. "They gave you rules and formulas, as if all plants were the same and all conditions identical. But nature cannot be forced. It can only be cooperated with." He showed Ming how to observe a plant's natural tendencies before pruning it. "This rose wants to grow toward the east. I could force it westward with stakes and ties, and it would obey, but it would never truly flourish. Or I can simply remove the obstacles in its eastern path and allow it to grow as it desires." "But master," Ming protested, "doesn't that make your job pointless? If you just let plants grow naturally, why does the emperor need a gardener?" Pan laughed. "Letting things grow naturally doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing only what is necessary, nothing more. Watch." He led Ming to a young bamboo grove. Years ago, Pan had planted these shoots, but he had not forced their growth. He had simply ensured they had good soil, adequate water, and protection from harsh winds. Now the bamboo stood tall and strong, having found its own way. Beside it was a different bamboo grove, planted by a previous gardener who had constantly pruned, staked, and shaped the plants according to aesthetic principles. These bamboo were shorter, weaker, and required constant maintenance to keep their forced shape. "Striving and forcing create weakness," Pan said. "Non-striving creates strength. The first grove requires almost no care now. The second will need intervention for its entire life. Which is the better gardening?" Ming began to understand, but old habits were hard to break. One day, he discovered a tree growing at an awkward angle and immediately began to stake it upright. Pan stopped him. "Why are you correcting the tree?" "Because it's growing crooked," Ming replied. "It should grow straight." "Says who?" Pan asked gently. "The tree is growing in the direction it needs to grow. Perhaps the soil is deeper on that side. Perhaps it's leaning toward better light. Perhaps this angle will make it stronger in wind. Or perhaps it will simply be a crooked tree, and that is fine too. Not everything needs to be straight to be beautiful." He placed his hand on the young tree. "Ming, in life as in gardening, most problems solve themselves if we don't interfere too much. Most difficulties we face are of our own making, created by forcing when we should yield, by acting when we should wait, by striving when we should simply be." Years passed, and Ming became an accomplished gardener himself. People would ask him the secret of his success, and he would smile, remembering Pan's teaching. "The secret," he would say, "is having no secret. I do not make plants grow, they grow themselves. I do not create beauty, beauty creates itself. My role is simply to provide conditions where natural processes can unfold without obstacle. I work very hard, but I strive for nothing. I accomplish much, but I force nothing. This is what Lao Tzu meant by Wu Wei. Doing without doing, action without striving, success without force. But how do you know when to act and when to wait? They would ask. Ming would gesture to his gardens, where every plant seemed to glow with vitality. The garden teaches you if you listen, and the greatest lesson it teaches is this: life wants to flourish. Your job is not to make it flourish, but to remove what prevents it from flourishing. Most of the time, what prevents flourishing is our own excessive effort, our own misguided striving, our own inability to trust nature's wisdom. He would pause, touching a flower that had bloomed that morning. The flower doesn't strive to be beautiful. It simply is. The river doesn't strive to reach the ocean. It simply flows. The sun doesn't strive to shine. It simply radiates. And when we learn to live like this, being rather than forcing, flowing rather than pushing, allowing rather than demanding, we find that we accomplish more through non-striving than we ever did through effort. 8. The power of humility. In the prosperous city of Luoyang, there lived two physicians. The first, Dr. Wei, was famous throughout the region. He practiced in a grand building, wore elaborate robes, and charged fees so high that only the wealthy could afford his services. When he walked the streets, people bowed low. When he spoke, his voice rang with authority. He published papers, trained students, and sat on important councils. The second, Dr. Qin, was barely known. She practiced in a simple room in a poor neighborhood, wore plain cotton clothes, and charged nothing for those who couldn't pay. She made house calls in all weather, held the hands of dying patients, and spent hours listening to old women describe their aches and pains. One day, the governor's wife fell gravely ill. Dr. Wei was summoned immediately. He examined her with great ceremony, prescribed expensive medicines, and declared confidently that she would recover within a week. But she didn't recover. In fact, she grew worse. Dr. Wei returned with different medicines, then different diagnoses. He consulted his books, conferred with colleagues, and tried increasingly elaborate treatments. The governor's wife continued to decline. Desperate, the governor heard whispers of Dr. Qin from his servants. Swallowing his pride, for how could the greatest physician in the city have failed where a poor neighborhood doctor might succeed? He sent for her. Dr. Qin arrived without fanfare, carrying a simple bag. She did not look like much, this small woman with gray hair and work-worn hands. Dr. Wei, who had been asked to stay and observe, watched with barely concealed contempt. But what happened next astonished everyone. Dr. Qin didn't immediately examine the patient. Instead, she sat beside the bed and talked with the governor's wife. She asked about her life, her worries, her sleep, her childhood, her dreams. She asked about her household, her relationships, her daily routines. Dr. Wei grew impatient. This is wasting time. The patient needs medicine, not conversation. Dr. Qin glanced at him calmly. A good physician treats the disease. A great physician treats the patient. And you cannot treat what you do not understand. After an hour of conversation and gentle examination, Dr. Qin made a simple recommendation. The governor's wife should leave her chamber, which was sealed tight against drafts, and spend time each day in the garden. She should eat less meat and more vegetables. She should laugh more and worry less. And she should drink a simple tea of common herbs. Dr. Wei scoffed. That's your prescription? Fresh air and vegetables? I prescribed the finest medicines from the imperial pharmacy. Yes, Dr. Qin replied softly. You prescribed what would make you appear wise. I prescribed what would make her well. There is a difference. Within days, the governor's wife began to improve. Within a week, she was walking in the garden. Within a month, she was completely recovered. The governor, grateful beyond measure, offered Dr. Qin a position as his personal physician with an enormous salary. She declined. But why? He asked, astonished. You could live in comfort, treat only the wealthy, become famous. I could, Dr. Qin agreed. But then I would become like Dr. Wei. more concerned with my reputation than my patience. Lao Tzu teaches that the sage does not seek to shine, and therefore shines brightly, does not display herself, and therefore is noticed, does not boast, and therefore has merit, does not exalt herself, and therefore rises. She packed her simple bag. I treat the poor because they teach me humility. I live simply because complexity obscures truth. I remain unknown because fame is a distraction from service. The moment I believe I am important, I become useless. The moment I think I know everything, I stop learning. The moment I accept honors, I lose my way. Dr. Wei, who had been standing nearby, felt shame wash over him. He had studied for decades, yet this simple woman understood something he had never grasped. Dr. Qin, he asked humbly, will you teach me? She looked at him with kind eyes. I cannot teach you humility, Dr. Wei, but life can if you let it. Begin by treating patients you previously thought beneath you. Continue by admitting when you don't know something. Practice by putting their recovery above your reputation. And remember, the valley is fertile because it lies low. Water flows to the lowest point, bringing life with it. Be like the valley, and wisdom will flow to you. Dr. Wei took her words to heart. Slowly, painfully, he began to change. He reduced his fees and opened his practice to the poor. He admitted his mistakes and learned from them. He stopped trying to impress and started trying to help. Years later, when asked about his transformation, he would say, I had to become empty before I could be filled. I had to become low before I could rise. I had to become small before I could understand anything great. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. And when you stop thinking about yourself, you finally have room to think about others. That is when real healing begins. The two physicians, once rivals, became colleagues and then friends. Together they served the city, one still learning humility, the other still embodying it. And people noticed that both practiced better medicine than either had practiced alone. For Dr. Wei brought knowledge and Dr. Qin brought wisdom, and together these created something greater than either could achieve separately. 9. Living in the present. In a monastery high in the mountains, a monk named Hui was famous for his anxiety. He worried about everything, whether he was practicing meditation correctly, whether his robes were clean enough, whether he was progressing on the spiritual path, whether he would achieve enlightenment. His mind was never where his body was. During morning meditation, he worried about evening chores. During meals, he worried about his meditation. During work, he worried about both. He lived perpetually between regret for the past and anxiety for the future, never quite touching the present moment. The abbot, seeing Huey's suffering, assigned him to work with the oldest monk in the monastery, Master Wu, who at 95 still tended the monastery garden with serene joy. Hui reported for his assignment with his usual anxiety. Master Wu, I'm worried I don't know anything about gardening. What if I kill the plants? What if I do something wrong? Master Wu didn't answer. Instead, he handed Hui a rake and said, Rake. Hui began raking, but his mind raced. Was he raking too hard? Too soft? Was this the right technique? Should he ask Master Wu for instructions? As he worried, he stumbled over a stone and fell, scattering the carefully raked leaves. I'm so sorry, Hui cried. I knew I would mess this up. I always do. I should have been more careful. I should have watched where I was going. I should have. Should have. Master Wu interrupted gently. You use those words often. But should have lives in the past, which is dead. Will happen lives in the future, which is unborn. Only is happening lives in the present, which is the only moment that exists. He helped Hui to his feet. Try again, but this time just rake. Not raking while thinking about raking. Not raking while worrying about raking. Simply raking. I don't understand, Hui said. I know, Master Wu smiled. That's why you're going to practice. Days passed and Hui struggled. His mind was like a wild monkey, jumping from past to future, from worry to regret, from fear to anxiety. But Master Wu was patient. Each time Huey's mind wandered, Master Wu would say one word, now. Master, yesterday I. Now. Master, tomorrow I need to. Now. Master, I'm worried that. Now. Gradually, something began to shift. One morning, Hui was sweeping the courtyard when he suddenly noticed the sound the broom made against the stones. Just the sound, nothing else. For a moment, he wasn't thinking about sweeping, he was sweeping. His mind and his action were one. The experience lasted only a few seconds before thoughts rushed back in, but Hui had glimpsed something profound. Master Wu! He ran to the garden. I think I felt it. Just for a moment, I was completely present. Master Wu continued watering plants. Good. Now you've felt the present once. Feel it 10,000 more times, and you'll begin to understand. 10,000 times? Hui's heart sank. But that will take years. Master Wu laughed. You see? Already you're in the future again. How many times must I tell you? Now. Only now. Always now. He set down his watering can. Hui, let me tell you a story. Once there was a man who inherited a magnificent house but lived in only one room. The room labeled regret, where he dwelt on past mistakes. Sometimes he visited the room labeled anxiety, where he worried about the future. But he never entered the room labeled now, which contained all the treasures of the house. He lived in a mansion but experienced poverty, because he refused to live where life actually happens. The past is a memory, which is just a thought in the present. The future is imagination, which is also just a thought in the present. Everything, absolutely everything, exists now. This breath, this heartbeat, this sound, this sensation. Right now is the only time you're alive. Right now is the only time you can experience joy. Right now is the only time you can choose. Yet you spend your entire life avoiding now, and then you wonder why life feels empty. Hui felt tears on his cheeks. Master, I understand with my mind, but how do I live it? Through practice, Master Wu replied. When you eat, taste the food. Don't think about whether it's healthy or whether you're eating correctly. Taste it. When you walk, feel your feet touching the earth. Don't think about your destination, feel the walking. When you breathe, follow the breath. Don't think about whether you're breathing correctly, simply breathe. The present moment is always here, waiting for you to arrive. But you must choose to arrive, again and again, 1,000 times a day. Years passed and Hui became a different person. Not because he achieved some great enlightenment, but because he learned to live in the ordinary moments that constitute a life. When he swept, he swept. When he ate, he ate. When he meditated, he meditated. His anxiety didn't disappear completely. He was human after all, but it no longer ruled him. He had learned that worry is interest paid on trouble before it comes due, and that most troubles never come. Other monks noticed the change and asked his secret. How did you become so peaceful? They asked. Hui would smile and reply, I learned that yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery, but today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. Lao Tzu teaches that if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. But don't you plan for tomorrow or learn from yesterday? They would ask. Of course, Hui replied. But I do that planning now. I do that learning now. Everything happens now. When tomorrow comes, it will be now. When you remember yesterday, you remember it now. There is only ever now. Once you truly understand this, life transforms from something you're always trying to get to into something you're always in the middle of. And that changes everything. 10. The unity of opposites. In a village divided by a river, two families had feuded for generations. The Lins, who lived on the north bank, were proud and unyielding. The Yangs, who lived on the south bank, were equally stubborn. No one remembered what had started the feud, but it continued nevertheless. A bitter, endless conflict passed from parents to children like an inheritance of hate. One year, both families lost their eldest sons. Lin Wei and Yang Ming died on the same day, struck by the same fever. The families buried their sons on opposite sides of the river, and their grief was so profound it could be felt throughout the village. Into this atmosphere of mourning came a strange old woman. No one knew where she came from, but she seemed to know everyone and everything. She visited both families, offering comfort, and somehow received it in both houses despite the feud. To Lin Wei's mother, she said, "Your grief is as deep as the ocean." To Yang Ming's mother, she said exactly the same words. A few days later, the old woman invited both mothers to meet her by the river, at the exact midpoint between their lands. Neither knew the other would be there. When they saw each other, both turned to leave. But the old woman's voice stopped them. "Stay, please. I have something to show you." She stood between them, one hand stretched toward each. "Tell me, which of you grieves more for her son?" Both mothers answered simultaneously, "I do." The old woman nodded. "Yes, you both do. And which of you loved her son more?" Again, both answered, "I do." "Yes," the old woman agreed. "And which of you would give anything to have her son back?" This time they understood. Slowly, hesitantly, they looked at each other, really looked, and saw not an enemy but a mirror. Each saw in the other's eyes the same unfathomable loss, the same bottomless grief, the same mother's love that transcends all reason. The old woman spoke softly. "You have been taught that you are opposites, north and south, yin and yang, enemy and enemy. But grief has revealed the truth. You are the same. In the most important ways, you have always been the same." She knelt and drew a yin-yang symbol in the sand, the black and white, each containing a seed of the other. "This is the teaching of Lao Tzu," she said. "What you call opposites are actually one. Light exists because of darkness. Joy exists because of sorrow. Life exists because of death. You cannot have one without the other. They are not enemies but partners in the eternal dance." She pointed to the symbol. "See how the black has white within it, and the white has black. This shows that each contains the seed of its opposite. Your families have defined yourselves by your opposition, but opposition is a form of connection. You have needed each other to know who you are. You are bound together by the very thing you thought separated you." Lin Wei's mother spoke, her voice breaking. "But we have hated each other for so long." "Yes," the old woman replied. "And that hatred came from the same passionate nature as love. Hatred and love are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin, two ways of caring deeply. Indifference is the true opposite of both." Yang Ming's mother asked, "How do we stop the feud?" "You don't stop it," the old woman said. "You transform it. You recognize that the energy you've put into conflict can be redirected into cooperation. The river that divides you could connect you. The differences you've fought over could enrich you. The families you've thought of as separate could become one community." She stood and walked to the river's edge. Water flows. It doesn't fight the rocks in its path. It flows around them. It doesn't struggle against being divided. It accepts division and then reunites downstream. It doesn't try to run uphill. It follows gravity. Yet in following the path of least resistance, it carves canyons and shapes continents. She turned back to them. "Your son's deaths have created an opening. A terrible opening, yes, but an opening nonetheless. Through this crack in your certainty, light can enter. Through this break in your hatred, love can grow. What will you choose?" The two mothers stood in silence, the river flowing between them like time itself. Finally, Lin Wei's mother extended her hand across the water. Yang Ming's mother reached out and clasped it. They held hands and wept together, their tears falling into the river, mixing with its flow, impossible to separate into north or south, Lin or Yang, enemy or friend. In the years that followed, the feud ended not with a treaty but with understanding. The families built a bridge across the river, and its construction became a symbol. What once divided now connected. Children from both families played together. Young people fell in love and married across the old boundaries. The village discovered that diversity was not something to fight over but something to celebrate. The two families brought different strengths, different perspectives, different gifts. The old woman was never seen again, but her teaching remained. When disputes arose, people would remember, opposites create each other. Conflict and harmony are partners. Division and unity dance together. The villagers built a shrine at the midpoint of the bridge, with the yin-yang symbol carved in stone. Beneath it was written, "What you call opposite is actually complementary. What you call problem is actually solution. What you call enemy is actually teacher. Everything contains its opposite. Everything becomes its opposite. Everything needs its opposite. This is the way of the Tao." And the village thrived, no longer spending its energy on conflict but on creation, no longer divided by the river but connected by it, no longer trapped in opposition but freed by the understanding that all opposites are ultimately one. These 10 teachings of Lao Tzu continue to echo through time, not as rules to follow but as invitations to see the world differently. They remind us that wisdom often lies in paradox, that strength comes through softness, that fullness comes through emptiness, and that the way forward often looks like stepping back. The Tao cannot be captured in words, yet these stories point toward it, like fingers pointing at the moon. The teaching is not in the words themselves but in what they awaken within us, the recognition that we already know these truths, that we have always known them, and that remembering them is the work of a lifetime.